John had never seen anything like it before. His usual quiet days spent in the remote research lab had been suddenly interrupted when he spotted an unusual figure near the edge of the forest. It was late, the sun was setting, and the world around him was bathed in a soft orange glow. At first, he thought it might be some kind of animal, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a woman, though not human. She was tall and slender, with silvery blue skin that shimmered in the fading light. Her eyes, large and round, were the color of a deep, endless ocean, and they looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope. She was not of Earth. John's heart skipped a beat as he took in the strange sight. Zara, the alien woman, had traveled far from her home planet, and she was completely alone. The planet she once called home had been destroyed in a war, and with it her entire species. She had lost everything: her family, her friends, and her beloved husband. Now, stranded on Earth with only her 2 children to care for, Zara found herself at the mercy of a foreign world she knew little about. As she gazed up at John, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had never imagined finding another being who could help her, yet here he was, a human. She spoke, her voice soft and broken, in an unfamiliar accent, but John could understand her words. "Please," Zora whispered, her voice trembling. "I am lost. My children, they have no home. I have no one." John stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. It wasn't every day that someone, let alone an alien, approached him with such a plea for help. He had always lived a quiet, solitary life, far from the hustle and bustle of the cities, researching plants and wildlife in the wilderness. He wasn't prepared for this, but there was something in her eyes that made him want to help. Are you okay?" John asked, taking a cautious step forward. "You're from another planet." Zara nodded slowly. "Yes, hi. I am Zora. My home is gone. My people are gone. I have nothing now." John's heart went out to her. He could see the pain in her eyes, the deep sorrow that had settled within her. But it wasn't just the sadness in her eyes that struck him. It was the fear of being lost in an unfamiliar place with no way to survive. Her children, who were hiding behind her, looked just as lost. "Where are your children?" John asked gently, his voice softening. Zara glanced over her shoulder, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "They are scared. They don't understand this place. They need a home, a place where they can grow. I can't give them that. I don't know how." John turned to look at the small figures standing in the shadows. 2 children, one a girl with pale violet skin and dark, curly hair, the other a boy who looked just like her, though a little younger. They both stood silently, clutching onto each other for comfort. "Come here," John said, his voice calm. "It's okay. You're safe now." The children hesitated at first, but after a moment, the girl cautiously stepped forward, her eyes wide with uncertainty. She seemed to sense that John meant no harm, and slowly she took his hand. Her brother followed, still clutching his mother's arm. Zara watched as her children took their first steps toward the human who had shown them kindness. Her heart swelled with gratitude, but at the same time, it was heavy with sadness. She knew her children could not remain hidden forever. They needed to be cared for, loved, and given the chance to live a full life. But what could she offer them? She was nothing more than a lonely widow from a destroyed world, stranded in a place she did not belong. "Please," Zara said again, her voice shaky. "Will you help us? I don't have much to offer, but I beg you, take them, raise them, give them a home. They are my only family now. They need a future." John looked at Zara, unsure of how to respond. Her words echoed in his mind, her request so heartbreaking, so desperate. She wasn't asking for herself, she was asking for her children. And for a moment, John understood. He understood the loneliness she felt, the pain of having no one to turn to. He had always been alone, living his life in isolation. But now, this woman, this alien widow, was asking him to take on the responsibility of her children. A responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready for. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw something that changed everything. A mother's love. Zara wasn't asking him to adopt her children because she couldn't care for them. She was asking because she loved them so much, and she didn't want them to suffer. She wanted them to have a chance at life, a chance to grow up in a world that wasn't filled with destruction. "Let me help you," John said, his voice steady. "I'll find a way to take care of them. We'll figure this out." Zara's face softened, a tear slipping down her cheek. She had never expected someone to offer help, especially not a human. But here he was, offering to take her children and give them a future. In that moment, Zara felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since the destruction of her world, she allowed herself to believe that things could get better. The days following Zora's arrival at John's secluded cabin were filled with uncertainty and quiet moments. John had offered her shelter, and though she was grateful, Zora couldn't shake the feeling that this was only temporary. She and her children had no place to call home. Even though John had been kind, she knew that without a permanent solution, the future would be just as uncertain as the past. Zora had spent much of her life as part of a thriving community on her home planet, surrounded by family and friends. Her people had been strong, resilient, and united until the war came. The war had taken everything from her, her family, her planet, and now, even her sense of belonging. It was a loneliness unlike any she had known. But now, with John's help, there was a chance for something new. Still, Zara felt the weight of her responsibility. One evening, as John was preparing a simple meal in the cabin, Zara sat on the couch, watching her children as they played with some small toys she had found for them. The girl, Lena, was trying to teach her younger brother, Kalen, how to stack a set of blocks, giggling every time they fell over. Despite everything they had been through, they still found moments of joy. John noticed how peaceful the children seemed, but he also saw the worry that lingered in Zara's eyes. She hadn't spoken much about her past, but he knew the grief was still there. He could see it in the way she looked at her children and the way she hesitated whenever she had to make a decision for them. Her world had been torn apart, and yet she was still fighting for her children's future. As John placed the last dish on the table, Zara stood up and approached him, her face serious. She had something she needed to say, something she had been holding inside for days. "John," Zara began softly, her voice low with emotion, "I need to ask you something important." John turned to her, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" Zara hesitated for a moment, her eyes glancing toward her children, who were still lost in their game. Finally, she spoke, her words coming slowly but with great weight. "Please," she said, her voice quivering. I want you to adopt them. My children. They need a future, a family. And I can't give them that." John felt a pang of confusion and sorrow. He hadn't expected such a request. Of course, he had promised to help her, but adoption was a serious commitment. It was something far beyond offering shelter. It meant taking on the responsibility of raising her children as his own, teaching them, caring for them, and giving them the love they deserved. John wasn't sure if he was ready for that kind of responsibility, especially given that Zora's children weren't human. "I don't know," John began, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I mean, they're not. They're not from here. They're from another planet." Zora's eyes dropped to the floor as she took a deep breath. "I understand your hesitation, John. I know this is not an easy decision, but I have no one else. I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking for them. Lena and Callan are just children. They deserve to grow up in a safe place, a place where they won't be hunted or abandoned. I want them to have a family, a real family." John's heart tightened as he listened. He could see how much Zora loved her children. Despite everything she had been through, she was still focused on their well-being. She wasn't asking for herself, but for them. Her eyes were filled with hope, and yet there was a deep sadness beneath that hope. She had no other choice, no other person to turn to. If John couldn't help, Zara didn't know where they would go. He glanced over at Lena and Kellen, who were now sitting on the floor, smiling and chatting with each other. They looked so innocent, so full of life despite the hardship they had already faced. John couldn't help but feel a wave of tenderness toward them. They were just children. They didn't deserve to grow up in fear. Zara was still waiting for his response, her gaze locked on his. She could see the struggle in his eyes. He wasn't sure, and who could blame him? Raising two children, especially alien children, was not something he had ever prepared for. But at the same time, John knew that if he didn't help them, who would? Zara couldn't do it alone, and her children needed more than just shelter. They needed a family. I don't know if I'm ready for this, John admitted, his voice quiet. But I can't just turn my back on you. On them. Zara's eyes brightened with a faint glimmer of hope. You don't have to decide everything right away. I'm not asking for everything all at once. But if you could take them in, raise them like your own, give them the love and care they deserve, it would mean everything to me. John's heart wavered as he thought about it. This wasn't going to be easy, and he didn't know if he could handle it. But as he watched Zara's children playing together, he knew there was no going back. They were already a part of his life, and he could see that they needed him, just as much as he needed them. I'll do it, John said softly, his voice filled with a quiet determination. I'll help you. I'll help them. Tears welled up in Zara's eyes, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Someone cared. Someone was willing to help her. And for the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she and her children could have a future. Thank you, John, Zara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for giving us a chance. John nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. We'll figure this out together. The days after John's decision to adopt Zara's children felt like a quiet transformation. It wasn't an instant change, but something within the cabin shifted. Zara felt the weight on her chest loosen as she saw the first signs of hope. John had taken on more responsibility than he had ever imagined, and in a way, Zara could see a new side of him, one that was willing to step up and make a difference in their lives. John knew that this was going to be harder than he had initially thought. He had never been a father before, and the idea of taking on two children, especially alien children, was overwhelming. Yet, every time he saw Lena and Kalen, there was something in their innocent smiles that made it all worth it. They were his responsibility now, and he had promised Zara that he would raise them with care. At first, it was the little things that John struggled with, adjusting to the sounds of children playing in his home, keeping up with their energy, and making sure they were happy. Zara was there to help, of course, but her own emotional burden made it difficult for her to be as involved as she wanted to be. She had spent so much time surviving. She had forgotten what it felt like to truly live. Lena and Kalen, on the other hand, embraced the new life with surprising ease. Their curiosity about their new surroundings seemed endless. Lena, the older of the two, was a quiet, thoughtful girl with a keen sense of observation. She was always asking questions about Earth and its customs, eager to understand the world she now lived in. Kalen, on the other hand, was a bundle of energy. He was fascinated by everything he saw, from the trees outside to the way John's car worked. Both children had adapted to their new environment, finding wonder in the simplest things. One afternoon, while John was fixing up the garden outside, Lena came to him, holding a piece of paper in her hand. Her eyes were wide with curiosity as she looked up at him. "John," she said, her voice soft but serious, "I want to help you. Can I plant something too?" John smiled, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "Of course, Lena. What do you want to plant?" Lena thought for a moment before pointing to a small patch of land near the garden. "Something that will make everyone happy. Something beautiful." John chuckled and ruffled her hair. "I think I have just the thing." He showed Lena how to plant a small flower, teaching her the basics of gardening. Lena was a quick learner, her hands carefully digging into the soil as she followed his instructions. As they worked together, John found himself enjoying the simplicity of the task. It was a reminder that life, no matter how complicated, could still be beautiful in its most basic form. Meanwhile, Callan had decided that the inside of the cabin needed some excitement. He had taken it upon himself to rearrange the furniture. He had a wild imagination and a knack for creating chaos. One morning, John came inside to find the entire living room transformed. Chairs were stacked on top of each other, and the cushions had been thrown all over the floor. Callan was sitting in the middle of the room, proudly admiring his work. Callan, what's all this?" John asked, trying to suppress a laugh. "I'm making the house more fun," Callan exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. "Look, it's a jungle now." John couldn't help but laugh. He had never known such boundless energy. The cabin, which had once been quiet and simple, was now filled with life and laughter. That evening after dinner, Zara sat with John by the fireplace, her eyes tired but content. She had been watching her children play all day, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. "I can't thank you enough," Zara said quietly, her voice full of emotion. "For everything. I never imagined they would be so happy here." John nodded, his gaze fixed on the crackling fire. "They're good kids. You've done a great job raising them, Zara. I'm just doing what I can." Zara smiled faintly, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted. "I've been trying to keep them safe, to keep them whole. But I don't know how to give them the life they deserve. I failed them once. I can't fail them again." John turned to her, his voice soft but firm. "You haven't failed them. You're doing your best. And now we're doing it together." Zara's eyes met his, and for a moment there was an unspoken understanding between them. She had always been strong, but now she realized that she didn't have to be strong alone. With John's help, she could give her children a chance at something better. It wasn't going to be easy, but they would face it together. As the days turned into weeks, John and Zara settled into their new routines. John worked hard to provide for the family, and Zara found herself gradually adjusting to the role of a mother once more. She began to heal in ways she hadn't thought possible, and her children flourished in the warmth of the home they had found. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, John stood outside and looked at the stars. He knew that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, especially with the world outside still uncertain. But as he looked at the cabin, his home, he felt a deep sense of contentment. He had opened his heart to a new family, and in return, he had found something he never expected, a sense of belonging. Inside the cabin, Zara and the children gathered around the table, their laughter filling the room. It was a sound that brought warmth to John's heart, and for the first time in a long time, he realized that they had already become a family. The days were growing longer as spring began to settle in. The air was warmer, and the flowers in the garden Zara and John had planted bloomed in vibrant colors. Yet despite the growing sense of peace around them, Zara felt a deep, gnawing worry. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to challenge the fragile life they had built. Life on Earth was not without its dangers, and Zara knew that she couldn't protect her children from everything. John, on the other hand, was doing his best to balance the new responsibilities. Every day brought new tasks and new challenges, but he found himself learning quickly. He had never thought much about what it would take to raise children, but now, with Zara's children in his care, he realized just how much he was learning, about patience, about love, and about himself. One evening, as John finished working outside, he noticed Lena sitting alone near the edge of the woods. She was gazing into the distance, her eyes distant and lost in thought. John walked over quietly, not wanting to disturb her. "Lena," he called softly. She looked up, surprised but not startled. "Hi, John," she said, her voice unusually quiet. "I was just thinking." John sat down beside her, sensing that something was bothering the young girl. "What's on your mind?" Lena hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I miss home," she admitted softly. "I miss my people. I don't know if I'll ever see them again. And I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by being here." John placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her comfort. "I know it's hard, Lena. You're in a new world, and it's not easy to leave everything behind. But you're not alone. You've got me, and you've got Zara, and we'll help you find your way." Lena looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But what if I don't belong here? What if I'm just an alien in a human world?" John smiled warmly, trying to ease her worries. "Lena, everyone belongs somewhere. You belong here with us, and you're part of this family now. There's nothing wrong with being different. It's what makes you special." Lena thought for a moment before nodding slowly. "I guess you're right. I'll try to be brave, like you." John chuckled softly, ruffling her hair. "Bravery comes in many forms. Sometimes it's just about facing the unknown and trying your best. And you're already doing that." Meanwhile, inside the cabin, Zara was dealing with her own concerns. She had been struggling with her emotions, torn between her desire to be the best mother she could be and the weight of her past. There were days when the pain of losing her husband felt too much to bear. She had given everything for her children, but there were still moments when the loneliness crept in. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Zara and John sat together in the quiet living room. The only sound coming from the crackling of the fire. Zara's eyes were tired, and John could see the exhaustion on her face. "Are you okay?" John asked gently. Zara sighed and leaned back in her chair, her eyes focused on the flames. "I'm just tired of trying to be everything to everyone. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough. I still carry so much from my past, and I don't know if I can ever truly let go." John nodded in understanding. "I know it's not easy, but you've already done more than most people could. You've kept your children safe, and you've given them a chance at a better life. That's something to be proud of." Zara met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and doubt. "But what if I'm not enough for them? What if they need more than I can give?" "You don't have to do it all alone," John reminded her softly. "You have me. You have the kids. We're all here for each other. And sometimes, that's enough." Zara looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't an instant solution, but she realized that she didn't have to carry everything by herself. She had a family now, a real family, and they were in this together. The next few days were filled with small moments of joy and frustration. Kalen's endless energy was both a source of laughter and chaos, and John was quickly learning that keeping up with him required more patience than he had ever imagined. Lena, on the other hand, continued to grow in confidence, asking more questions about Earth and eagerly learning about human culture. Zara found herself taking pride in the way her children were adjusting to their new life. But with every step forward, Zora couldn't help but wonder about the future. The world outside the cabin still held many dangers. She had seen the news about alien activity and the growing tensions between different species. What if someone came looking for her children? What if they weren't safe here? One afternoon, while John was out gathering firewood, Zara overheard a conversation between Lena and Kalen. They were sitting outside, talking in their quiet alien language, and Zara was struck by how natural it felt. She had worried so much about their adjustment, but in moments like these, she saw the truth. They had already found a place in this world. Zara realized that the most important thing she could do was trust in what they had built. She had already given her children the greatest gift, the chance to be loved, to be part of something greater than themselves. She couldn't control everything, but she could provide them with the love and safety they needed. As the sun set behind the trees, Zara stood at the door and watched her children play. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope stir in her heart. There would still be challenges ahead, but she knew she wasn't alone. And with the strength of her new family, They could face whatever came next. The days continued to blend into each other as spring deepened into summer. The garden bloomed brightly, and the children's laughter filled the air. But Zara could feel the weight of something unseen pressing against her. The quiet serenity they had come to cherish was fragile, and she was painfully aware of the world outside their little cabin. Things were changing, and Zara couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful life was under threat. It was one afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the land, that Zara's worries took shape. She had just finished making dinner when John came rushing into the cabin, his face serious, his eyes wide with concern. "Zara, we need to talk," John said quickly, his voice low. Zara felt her heart skip a beat. "What's wrong?" "There's a message. I think someone's looking for us," John said, holding up a small device that looked like an old communication pad. "I found it near the woods while I was out gathering firewood. It wasn't from anyone I recognize. It came from a ship." Zara froze, her blood running cold. The message wasn't clear, but there was no mistaking the tone. It was urgent. She knew that whoever had sent it was looking for someone, and she feared it was her. Her past had always been lurking in the shadows, waiting to catch up with her. And now it seemed that her worst fears were coming true. "Do you think it's about me?" Zara asked, her voice trembling. John nodded, his jaw tight. "I don't know, but we need to be ready. We can't afford to take chances." Zara turned to look at the children, who were busy playing outside, unaware of the tension that had suddenly entered their lives. She couldn't let them know what was happening. They had enough to worry about, especially Lena, who was still adjusting to life on Earth. Zara couldn't bear the thought of her children facing danger. "Do you think they'll come here?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," John replied, "but we need to prepare. We can't stay here and wait for them to show up. We need to move." Zara nodded, the weight of his words settling in her chest. For years, she had lived in hiding, running from a past that would never let her go. Now it seemed that her past was catching up with her, and it was bringing danger to the only place where she had ever felt truly safe. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Zara and John sat together in the dim light of the cabin, talking quietly. The message weighed heavily on both of them, and they knew that their lives were about to change. But they couldn't afford to panic. Not when there was so much at stake. "We have to think about the kids," Zara said, her voice firm. "They've been through so much already. We can't let them get hurt." John reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We won't let anything happen to them. I promise." The next morning, John and Zara began making preparations. They packed their bags, collected supplies, and made sure everything was ready in case they had to leave in a hurry. Zara couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness as she looked around the cabin. This had been their home, their safe haven, but now it seemed as though it was only temporary. By noon, everything was ready. John had loaded the car, and they were just about to leave when Lena and Callan came running toward them. "Where are you going?" Lena asked, her voice full of curiosity. Zara crouched down to meet her eye level. "We need to leave for a little while. It's just a precaution, okay?" Lena's brow furrowed in confusion. "Why? What's going on?" Zara hesitated. She didn't want to lie to her children, but she also didn't want to scare them. "It's nothing you need to worry about right now," she said softly. "Just trust me, okay?" Lena nodded slowly, sensing that something wasn't right, but she didn't press any further. Callan, on the other hand, was more eager to go on an adventure than to ask questions. He bounced up and down, excited by the prospect of leaving the house for a while. As Zara helped Callan into the car, she glanced back at the cabin one last time. The peaceful life they had built was slipping away, and she couldn't stop it. She only hoped that whatever was coming wouldn't destroy the fragile happiness they had found. John started the car and drove down the dirt road, the wheels crunching over the gravel. Zara sat quietly, her thoughts racing. The message, the warning, the fear, it was all so overwhelming. But in that moment, as she looked at her children in the back seat, she knew that no matter what happened, she would do everything in her power to protect them. The road stretched out before them, a symbol of the uncertainty that lay ahead. They didn't know where they were going, but they couldn't stay in the cabin anymore. They had to keep moving, keep running, and hope that the storm that was coming wouldn't catch up to them. But Zara couldn't help but wonder, how much longer could they run? How long before the past finally caught up with her? The silence in the car was heavy, but it was also filled with resolve. Zara knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, she and John would face it together, side by side. And she would do everything she could to make sure her children remained safe. As the car disappeared down the winding road, the shadows grew longer. Zara's heart raced, but she held on to the one thing she knew for sure: the love she had for her children and the strength of the family they had become. The days of uncertainty stretched into a blur. The car had taken them far from the cabin, down unfamiliar roads to a small town where they decided to rest. Zara had never been fond of large crowds or unfamiliar places, but for the sake of her children, she would endure it. The town was quiet, nestled among the hills, far from the life they had once known. Zara, John, and the children found a modest inn to stay in. It wasn't much, but it was safe, for now. As the night descended, the flickering of the streetlights outside cast long shadows, and Zara couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at her. The message, the unknown sender, it all weighed heavily on her mind. Whoever it was, they were getting closer. John sat across from her at the small wooden table, his eyes tired but determined. They had barely spoken since they arrived at the inn, both too lost in their own thoughts to say much. But now, as the silence lingered, John broke it. "We need to talk," he said softly. Zara looked up at him, her gaze sharp. "About what?" "The message," John replied. "I think it's from someone who knows you. Someone who's been looking for you." Zara's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let the fear show. She had learned long ago to hide her emotions when it came to matters of survival. "I know. I'm not stupid. I don't want to face it." "You can't run forever," John said gently, "but we can fight this, together." Zara met his gaze, her expression hardening. "I don't want to put you in danger. This isn't your fight. It's mine." John's eyes softened. "We're in this together, Zara. You don't have to carry this burden alone. Whatever's coming, we face it as a family." Zara didn't respond right away. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but her instincts told her that keeping the children safe was the only priority. She couldn't risk their lives because of her past. She had already lost so much. At that moment, Kalen came running into the room, his face lighting up with excitement. "Mom, Mom, there's someone at the door," he exclaimed. Zara's heart skipped a beat. She exchanged a glance with John, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the tension rising, the same feeling that had plagued her for days now. She stood up quickly, motioning for John to follow her. They opened the door cautiously, only to find a man standing there. He was tall, wearing a long coat, and his face was partially obscured by a hood. Zara's breath caught in her throat as she took in his appearance. There was something about him, something familiar, that made her pulse race. "Who are you?" John asked, stepping in front of Zara protectively. The man's voice was smooth, almost too calm. "I'm looking for someone," he said. "Zara, I believe you know her." Zara's heart pounded. She knew the moment had come. She couldn't run any longer. She had to face the truth, whatever it was. "Why are you looking for me?" she demanded, trying to steady her voice. The man smiled, but it was a cold smile. "It's not just you I'm after. It's your children too." John immediately stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "You stay away from them." The man raised a hand, signaling for John to calm down. "Relax. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm simply here to take you back to where you belong." Zara's blood ran cold. She had known this day would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it all too real. "I won't go back," Zara said firmly, her voice shaking only slightly. "I've built a life here, and I won't let you take it from me." The man's eyes darkened. "You don't have a choice. The time has come for you to return. Your past is catching up with you, Zara." Zara felt a chill run down her spine. Her past, the one she had tried so hard to leave behind, was finally catching up with her. And now it was threatening the only family she had left. John stood his ground, not backing down. "If you think we're just going to go with you, you're wrong. We're not going anywhere." The man's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "You can't stop this. You don't know who you're dealing with." Zara's mind raced. She had to act quickly. She couldn't let this man take her children, or John. She wasn't going to lose them. With a sudden movement, Zara grabbed John's hand and pulled him back into the room, closing the door behind her. She leaned against it, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do we do?" she whispered, panic threatening to overtake her. John turned to her, his expression calm. "We fight, but we can't do it here. We need to get the kids out of here, fast." Zara nodded, her mind working quickly. She couldn't stay here. They couldn't stay in the inn another night. The danger was too close now. It was time to leave again, to keep running. But where would they go? Would they ever be able to escape? Before Zara could answer, a loud crash came from outside. It was followed by shouting, voices in a language Zara didn't recognize. She turned to John, fear flickering in her eyes. "They're here," Zara said, her voice barely a whisper. John grabbed her hand firmly. "It's not over yet. We're not giving up." Zara's heart swelled with determination. She had a family to protect, and no one, no matter who they were, was going to take that from her. The pounding at the door grew louder, echoing through the narrow hallway of the inn. Zara's heart raced in her chest, every beat a reminder of how close the danger was. She pulled her children closer, trying to hide the fear in her eyes. She could sense John's tension beside her, but he didn't let it show. His calm demeanor was the only thing keeping her grounded in the chaos that was quickly unfolding. "We have to move fast," John whispered, his voice steady but urgent. Zara nodded. She knew their time was running out. The man who had claimed he was sent to take them back wasn't alone. The shouting from outside had intensified, and the alien language they didn't understand seemed to add to the growing panic. Zara's mind raced, searching for a way out. "We can't stay here," Zara said, her voice tight. "We have to leave now." She turned to the children, who were clinging to each other, eyes wide with fear. She knelt down to their level, her voice gentle but firm. "Listen to me. We have to stay quiet and stay close. We're going to get out of here, I promise." Kalen, her eldest son, nodded, his face filled with determination. Zara could see his courage in his eyes, and it gave her strength. He had always been the one who looked after his siblings, and in this moment, he was trying to protect her. "What's happening, Mom?" Kalen asked, his voice trembling slightly. "There are some people who want to hurt us," Zara replied softly, "but we're not going to let them." John stepped forward, his expression resolute. "We need to get out of here through the back. I'll go first and clear the way." Zara nodded, her heart filled with gratitude. John's bravery and unwavering support had made all the difference. Without him, she would have been lost. He was the anchor that had kept them grounded in the storm. And now, as the storm raged around them, he was going to lead them to safety. They moved quietly through the inn, avoiding the main hallway where the men were still banging on the door. Zara's breath caught in her throat each time the door shuddered under their pressure. She knew it wouldn't hold for long, but she also knew that they couldn't stay trapped in this room any longer. The danger was too real. When they reached the back door, John checked it carefully, ensuring no one was on the other side. With a quick nod, he opened the door and stepped outside, signaling for Zara and the children to follow. The cool night air hit them like a rush of fresh air, but there was no time to enjoy it. The threat was still looming, and they had to keep moving. As they made their way down the narrow alley behind the inn, Zara could hear the distant sounds of footsteps and voices approaching. It was clear that their pursuers weren't far behind. She clenched her fists, willing herself to stay calm. She had to protect her family, no matter the cost. John led them through the alley, turning down another street, and then another. Zara kept her eyes trained on their surroundings, every nerve on edge. The quietness of the night felt oppressive now, like the calm before a storm. But she couldn't afford to let fear control her, not when her children's lives were at stake. After what felt like an eternity, John finally stopped in front of a small, rundown house. "This is it," he said, breathing heavily. "We'll be safe here for a while." Zora glanced around, her heart still racing. The house looked abandoned, but that was exactly what they needed, a place to hide, even if only for a short time. She pushed the door open cautiously, and they all stepped inside. The darkness inside the house was welcoming, and for a moment, Zara allowed herself to breathe a little easier. But it was only temporary. She knew that. The threat wasn't gone. It was still out there, waiting for them to make a mistake, and she couldn't afford to make one. "We need to plan," John said, his voice low. "We can't keep running forever. They'll find us eventually." Zara nodded, her mind already working on a plan. "I know, but we need time. I'll think of something. We can't go back to the way things were." The children gathered around them, their eyes wide with worry. Zara could see the fear in their faces, but also something else, a strength, a resilience. They weren't just scared anymore. They were ready to fight, to stand with her, and that gave her hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, Zara felt something other than fear. She felt the weight of her responsibility as a mother, but she also felt the strength of her family. They were no longer just survivors. They were a team, and nothing could break them apart. As she looked at John, standing beside her, Zara knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, they would face it together. They had already made it through so much. They had built a life from the ashes of their past, and they wouldn't let it be destroyed by the darkness that was chasing them. "They're not going to win," Zara said, her voice fierce with determination. "We will keep our family safe. No one can take that from us." John placed a hand on her shoulder, his smile reassuring. "You're right. We've come too far to give up now." Zara smiled back, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't alone anymore. She had John. She had her children. And together, they would fight for their future.